This content is not really about Virat Kohli and the quality of his captaincy, and the reason for that is that leadership is almost impossible to talk about properly in cricket. I mean, let's bring it down to basics. Captains choose batting orders, and in tests they're pretty much set in stone unless there's a huge disaster or, I don't know, someone gets stuck on the toilet. And in modern cricket, coaches probably have as much, if not even more say when it comes to batting orders.
This is the last knock. My dad told me to say this.
Then there is the toss, which can be huge, but in truth, the most important thing at the toss is usually winning it. You can make mistakes at the toss, but losing it and letting the other captain make the decision will also end up in them making the wrong one sometimes. The truth is that the toss is mostly obvious what you're going to do, and sometimes it's not, and in those situations, there's just an element of luck involved. And at the end, we just base it on whether they won or lost, right? What about bowling changes? You choose whoever is not tied in a four-man attack almost all the time. Even the so-called inspired changes are usually because of a good matchup. And they're often talked about the team before they even take the field. The golden arm part-timers are applauded when they come off, and, we kind of ignore them when they don't. But they either come on because of desperation or conditions anyway. It gets a little bit more tactical in a five-man attack, and Kohli certainly had access to one of those for a few times. But you're still just looking at rotating your bowlers most of the time. We focus on the tactics for most of this, but usually the conditions and the match situation play a much bigger part in who bowls next. The second new ball, reverse swing, a bunch of left-handers at the crease, all those sorts of things is going to dictate much more who a captain uses than, special captaincy spider senses. What about fielding positions, I hear your drunk uncle ask? Well, I actually did a video on that a while ago, and the reason I made it is because people kind of say nonsensical things about that as well. Let's say a catch goes to where third slip was, and the simple thing to say is that the third slip would have caught it. But that third slip is from a set of 9 people. In order for the bowler to have built up the pressure to get that edge, quite often you'll have needed that play in the ring or on the boundary to create the pressure in the first place. I mean, there's a lot of things that we say about fielding. Put it this way, a batter will know if you put a bunch of leg side boundary riders out that you're about to bounce them. However, the best bouncer is often a surprise, but if you do that with only one fielder out, the catch may not be caught. But if you're wondering at home, you'll think, why didn't they have someone out? One of cricket's oddest things is we have tracked where players have hit the ball for over 100 years, but not where the fielders stand. Meaning that we have these beautiful wagon wheels that show us exactly where the fielders were not standing. And when it comes to the field, we really just have no idea. And so we basically have 3 main types of cricket captains when it comes to fields. Funky captains, who at least try and make it interesting and are proactive and attacking. Conservative captains who protect runs over chasing wickets. And ball chasing captains who will move a man precisely where the ball was just hit over and over. The thing is, most captains are a mix of 2 of these anyway. As when it comes to ball chasing, it's kind of hard not to put a fielder where the ball is hit at a certain point. But if Virat Kohli was leaning towards one of these the most, it's probably ball chasing. And that kind of captaincy works when you're playing against a struggling batter. Oh, he's nicked that. I know what I'll do. I'll put in another slip. But ball chasing captains don't work when you're going up against a batter who's completely on top. Oh, he's pumped that through cover. Well, I better lock up that gap. Oh, now he hit the ball through his square leg. And that's where I took the person to go to cover. Now I better move someone else. That doesn't really work. But remember that everything I've just said there is completely subjective. Because we don't know how to measure all this. I can't even tell you which one of those series is better than the other. In fact, I can't even tell you with certainty that Kohli is one of those kinds of captains. Or that those kinds of captains actually exist at all. And we haven't even got into the really subjective captaincy stuff yet. Like how they have given confidence to a young player or broken a member of their side. In truth, this is probably the most important thing a captain can do. Because for all the small tactical gains, making Wasim Akram into Wasim Akram is more important than a third slip for Wasim Akram when an edge is there. He's going to get a lot of edges, and one of them will eventually find a fielder. But getting the most out of your squad is absolutely essential. Because regardless of the toss or batting order, if you go into a game with the best 11 players on the field, you're going to win a lot more games. But here is the tricky bit. A player getting better or worse under a captain is maybe absolutely nothing at all to do with the captain. You can back a guy 100%, but if the thing that made them take test wickets no longer works because their body is not what it used to be, then they're done. You can tell a guy that form is temporary and class is permanent until you lose your voice. But if other teams have worked out how to dismiss them and they can't overcome that, they're shit out of luck. Most things in cricket over a long period come down to technique. And unless as a captain you are a massive technical savant, you probably can't help your players that much. And let me tell you one of the best stories about captain saving a player. Jacques Callis told Cricket Australia website a few years ago about how Graham Smith and Mickey Arthur, the coach, had turned AB de Villiers' career around. De Villiers had given a soft wicket at Lords, and Callis said that the conversation that followed was frank and without any soft edges. They basically told him at the time that he had to deliver on his talent. And since then, de Villiers averaged more than 60 in tests and ODI over the following 7 or so years. That's great captaincy, right? But there are so many parts of this that need to be thought. I find this hard to believe this was the first time that Smith or Arthur had ever said this to de Villiers, or that anyone had ever said this to de Villiers. There is also a chance that de Villiers could have got very upset by this and thought, to hell with these guys. I am trying really hard, even if he may not have been. And a real rift opened up that ends with him splitting with South African cricket even earlier. It's possible that he had heard that speech so many times before that it made no impact on him, and he just happened to make 100 the next week and bring his... And that inspired him to get better. And the other thing is that de Villiers was already really good. He was quite experienced and about to hit his prime. There are a bunch of reasons why he got good. But the most important thing was that Graham Smith already had a top player in his team. He wasn't trying to turn grass and cow shit into steak and chips, was he? And that doesn't mean that these stories of great captaincy don't happen. And that someone of Virat Kohli's statue couldn't inspire anyone. But it can also break someone, even by accident. The best thing a captain can really do with talent is ensure that it gets the small tweaks at the top level and that they try and use it when they can get the most out of it. And the stories like de Villiers are great, but it also overlooks how hard he and his coaches worked for decades to get him out in the middle and averaging nearly 40 in the first place. This is really what a captain needs, young, naturally gifted players to arrive at test level ready or near enough. And Graham Smith is important here, as he is the most winningest captain of all times in Test cricket. And Kohli will finish with a better winning record, but at number 4 on that list. And around him are a few other players with even better captaincy records than Kohli. So does this make Steve Waugh a better leader than Virat Kohli? I mean, Waugh never had a problem that he wouldn't try and fix with an extra slip. Or Ricky Ponting, who was less attacking with his slips, but like Waugh had the same once-in-a-generation bowlers or twice-in-a-generation bowlers to chuck the ball to. In fact, all 5 of these captains have something very much in common, other than, all the wins. They all had great bowling lineups. Clive Lloyd should get credit for bringing his together, and his captaincy was perhaps the trickiest. He had a fractured set of nations with a terribly amateur system, and he doubled down on a theory that not only won the West Indies a lot of games, but actually changed cricket forever. But he still had an endless group of great fast bowlers to carry him to victory over and over again. Ponting and Waugh both had McGrath, Warne, and even Gillespie available to them. Smith inherited Callis, Pollock, and Antini. Some captains with incredibly poor records must look at these bowling lineups and think, if I only. Virat Kohli has a 5-man bowling attack that can boast R. Ashwin, Ravi Jadeja, late career Ishant Sharma, Mohammad Shami, and Jasprit Bumrah. We don't even know how good Akshar Patel or Mohammad Siraj is yet. And he even has backups like Bhuvi Kumar and Umesh Patel. I mean, life is pretty good with these options, right? Is Virat Kohli honestly a better captain than Nasser Hussain, though? Who swindled wins out of a broken team that he put together when England were rated lower than Zimbabwe on the rankings. But Nasser doesn't go down as a great captain, though. In fact, he's more well known for that time he took a side to Australia that weren't as good as the hosts and made an error at the toss that probably he was going to lose the game of regardless. So I can't fulfill your love or hate for Virat Kohli's leadership with numbers or even that many facts. But I will say this, no one has to captain. For some players, it might mean a lot more money, but I can't imagine any player gets double what they would normally get, which is probably what you would need at least to take it on in the first place. I mean, it is instantly doubling your workload for sure. Having worked in T20 teams, sometimes I look at the captains and I think, why have you done this? Like, this is hard and you don't need to do it. And your auction price is exactly the same whether you have this or not. I honestly love captaining cricket teams when I get the chance. But at the top level, when you're doing everything you can to get the most out of your own game, when your pay depends on your reputation, all those sorts of things, I don't know. It's not a great job. It also trebles the pressure you're under. Look at Joe Root right now. All of his runs don't save him from the fact that England just had a year that might ruin his captaincy career. He tripled the next best batter in his team, and many England fans want him fired. Is Root supposed to bat from both ends? It's great to be in charge if it suits your personality or maybe even your skills. But it's a public-facing management position where you are one key bowling injury from people burning you in effigy. If you are in your country's best 3 players and you are taking the job, you're doing so out of a sense of duty to your national team. And we're talking about cricket everywhere. But this is the Indian job in a 24-hour tweet cycle. 1 million or so people will scrutinise every facial gesture that Virat Kohli has. Watching Indian cricket broadcast now reminds you of the great Zinedine Zidane documentary, where they just didn't look at the rest of the players and just kept the cameras on him the entire time. And we also now have opposition IPL franchise superfans looking to bring him down so their leader can take over. And the whole situation is probably a lot worse than the old greybeards in the press pack trying to pick their favourite back in the days of Indian cricket. And I've had first-hand experience of how mad the sort of whole Virat Kohli nonsense is. Abhinav Mukund came on my podcast, and people misheard what he said about Virat Kohli as he phrased something slightly clunkily. There were like 10 news articles about what he had said on my podcast, despite the fact that no one reached out to me, the host, to check the tape. Most of them never even listened to the podcast. And it wasn't what he said anyway. And that's because Virat Kohli is content. He certainly tweets like he is anyway. But at all times he has to deal with this ridiculous expectations of the Indian public, the actual normal everyday stresses of captaining an international cricket team, a tough batting error that has taken a big chunk out of his average, and comparisons to Sourav Ganguly, Rohit Sharma, Sunil Gavaskar, MS Dhoni, and probably, I don't know if they're old enough, Tiger. And when you look at Kohli content, you wonder if his brand would be worth even more if he just left the job to someone else. His team wins a lot. Importantly, they haven't collected silverware. But if New Zealand are the best all-format tournament team, then India are the best all-format non-tournament team. And by, like, a long way. They've won so much that people are now complaining when they win, the way that used to happen with bored Australian fans back in the day. Now, how much of this is because of him is up for debate. But there's one thing that just isn't. Kohli is just a regular flawed human who happens to be great at batting. You could argue with his recent test form or the fact that he doesn't maximise his talent in T20, but he's an unquestionable all-format great bat. Now, is he that at captaining? Probably not, but I have no real actual idea, and I'm just basing that on anecdotes and the eye tests, despite the fact that I've never been in the Indian change room. However, in the next few days, you will hear a lot about how Virat Kohli is or isn't a great captain. And most of that will be opinion, and as uninformed as mine, but probably far more definite. On it, here we try and deal with facts, news, figures, analysis as truthfully as we can. So this is what I know for sure. Virat Kohli is a great batter, and Virat Kohli was India's captain. The only other thing I'm sure of is that Virat Kohli gave a lot of people a lot to talk about. He may not be cricket's greatest captain, but he certainly is cricket's greatest content provider.